A disclaimer, this video is for educational and informational purposes only. The content shared here is based on personal opinions and general financial knowledge. I am not a certified financial advisor. Please do your own research or consult a qualified financial professional before making any financial decisions. The creator of this video is not responsible for any profit or loss incurred based on the information provided. Investments are subject to market risk. The memo wasn't supposed to go public, dated 11 days ago, internal distribution only, marked confidential. Sent from a regional compliance director at one of America's top 5 banks to branch managers across 3 states. Subject line, implementation timeline for enhanced cash management protocols. Inside that memo, buried on page 4, a single paragraph that changes everything. Effective in October next month, all cash withdrawal requests exceeding $600 will require enhanced documentation, supervisor approval, and a minimum 48-hour processing window. This threshold aligns with incoming Treasury guidance, and it represents phase 1 of our institution's cash management modernization initiative. $600, not $10,000, not $5,000, $600. That's a tank of gas and groceries. That's a car repair. That's the cash you might need for an emergency on any given day. And starting next month, getting it out of your own account will require paperwork, approval, and a 2-day wait. The memo goes on. Phase 2, scheduled for Q3, lowers the threshold to $300. Phase 3, by year end, implements digital-first disbursement protocols for all transactions, meaning they'd prefer you don't take cash at all. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. I have the document. I'm going to show you the relevant sections. I'm going to show you the regulatory guidance it references. And I'm going to show you why this particular bank is just the first domino. Because this memo didn't come from nowhere. It came from Treasury Department guidance issued 6 weeks ago. Guidance that every major bank received. Guidance that every major bank is now figuring out how to implement. The question isn't whether this is coming to your bank. The question is whether you have 30 days to prepare before your access to your own money fundamentally changes. Welcome to Finance Market News. Before we go through this document page by page, before I show you exactly how this connects to regulations that have been quietly building for 3 years, I need to ask you something. Are you subscribed to this channel? Look, I know everyone asks, but here's why it matters for what we're covering today. This memo was sent to me by a bank employee who watches this channel, someone who saw our previous coverage on banking regulations and realized we'd actually cover this instead of burying it, someone who trusts that we'll present the documents accurately and explain what they mean. That only happens because we've built an audience that cares about this information, an audience that shares these videos, an audience that makes sources willing to take the risk of leaking internal documents. So if you want to keep seeing content like this, if you want to be the person who knows what's coming before the headlines catch up, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because the next 30 days are going to see a lot of developments, and you need to be informed before your bank sends you a letter explaining the new rules. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you noticed any changes at your bank recently? New forms, new questions when you withdraw cash, longer wait times? I'm building a picture of what's happening across different institutions, and your observations matter. Now let's go through this memo, and I'll show you exactly what's coming. I'm going to walk through the key sections of this memo. I've redacted identifying information to protect the source, but the substantive content is intact. The memo is 12 pages. Most of it is procedural, implementation timelines, training requirements, system updates. But the policy sections tell us everything we need to know about where banking is heading. Section 2.1, titled Cash Disbursement Protocol Modifications. Quote, in accordance with FinCEN Guidance Memorandum 2024-G003 and Treasury Department Circular regarding enhanced transaction monitoring, the following modifications to cash disbursement procedures will be implemented effective on date. Let me stop there. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They're the Treasury Department bureau responsible for anti-money laundering regulations. When a bank memo references FinCEN guidance, they're not making policy. They're implementing policy that came from federal regulators. This is important. When this becomes public, the bank will say they're just following regulations. And technically, they'll be correct. But the regulations were written specifically to create this outcome. The bank is the implementation mechanism. The government is the policy origin. Continuing with Section 2.1, all cash withdrawal requests at or above $600 will be classified as enhanced monitoring transactions, EMTs. EMTs require Handui 1, completion of Form 8300A, cash disbursement purpose declaration, 2, supervisor verification and approval, 3, minimum 48-hour processing for amounts exceeding $2,000, 4, automatic suspicious activity report, SAR, filing for any transaction that meets pattern recognition criteria defined in Appendix C. Let me break down what this means in practice. You walk into your bank, You want to withdraw $800 to pay a contractor who only takes cash. Under these new protocols, here's what happens. First, you fill out a form declaring the purpose of the withdrawal. Why do you need this money? What are you going to do with it? Who is receiving it? This information goes into a database. Second, a supervisor must approve the transaction. The teller can't just give you your money. Someone higher up must review and authorize. Third, if you want more than $2,000, you wait 48 hours. You don't walk out with cash that day. You submit a request. You come back 2 days later, assuming it's approved. Fourth, and this is the part that should concern everyone, if your transaction matches any pattern recognition criteria, a suspicious activity report is automatically filed. Not reviewed by a human and then filed. Automatically filed. What are the pattern recognition criteria? The memo references Appendix C, which I don't have. But based on existing FinCEN guidance, we know what typically triggers algorithmic flags. Withdrawing round numbers. Withdrawing amounts just below reporting thresholds. Withdrawing on regular schedules. Withdrawing after receiving deposits from certain categories of senders. Withdrawing and then making purchases at certain types of businesses. The algorithms are proprietary. The criteria are opaque. You might trigger a SAR filing without any idea why. And once that SAR is filed, it goes into a federal database. It never goes away. It can be accessed by law enforcement. It can affect future financial services. It becomes part of your permanent financial record. Section 3.2 addresses what the memo calls digital first migration strategy. Quote, cash disbursements represent significant operational cost and regulatory burden. The institution's strategic objective is 80% reduction in cash disbursement volume by end of fiscal year 2026. Branch personnel should actively promote digital payment alternatives, including Zelle, ACH transfer, and debit card usage as preferred disbursement methods. Read that again. 80% reduction in cash disbursements by 2026. They don't want to give you cash. They want you to use digital methods they can track completely. The memo instructs employees to actively promote digital alternatives. This means when you ask for cash, the teller is trained to suggest you don't need cash. Maybe you'd prefer a Zelle transfer. Maybe a debit card is more convenient. The gentle pressure to stay in the digital system. Section 4.1 covers customer communication protocols. Quote, branch personnel should not proactively inform customers of enhanced monitoring transaction classifications. If customers inquire about new procedures, standard response is, we've implemented updated security protocols to protect your account. Detailed policy information should only be provided upon specific written requests submitted through official channels. They're telling employees not to explain what's happening. If you ask why there's new paperwork, the scripted response is vague. Updated security protocols. Only if you submit a written request through official channels do you get actual information. This is deliberate obscurity. They know customers would be upset if they understood the surveillance implications, so they're trained to minimize, deflect, and bureaucratically obstruct. Section 5.3 discusses unhosted wallet interaction protocols. This section specifically addresses cryptocurrency. Quote, any customer request to withdraw cash for the stated purpose of purchasing cryptocurrency, or any customer whose account shows patterns consistent with cryptocurrency exchange interaction, should be flagged for enhanced review. Such customers represent elevated regulatory risk and may be subject to account restrictions at institutional discretion. If you tell your bank you want cash to buy Bitcoin, you're flagged. If your account shows transfers to Coinbase or other exchanges, you're flagged. These flags can result in account restrictions at institutional discretion, meaning they can limit your access without specific cause. The war on cash and the war on crypto are the same war. Both represent money moving outside the fully surveilled digital banking system. Both are being restricted through the same regulatory mechanisms. Section 7.4, the final section I'll cover, addresses regulatory coordination. Quote, implementation timelines are coordinated across major financial institutions per Treasury guidance. Institutions implementing EMT protocols will share anonymized transaction pattern data through the FinCEN Secure Reporting Portal. This collaborative approach ensures consistent customer experience and prevents regulatory arbitrage. Regulatory arbitrage means moving your money to a bank with less restrictive policies. They're preventing that by coordinating implementation across all major banks simultaneously. If Bank of America implements $600 limits, so does Chase, so does Wells Fargo, so does Citi. You can't escape by switching banks. They're all doing it together because they were all told to do it together. The memo concludes with training schedules, system update timelines, and compliance certification requirements. The mechanics of implementation, the bureaucratic machinery that turns policy into practice, and all of it going live next month. Now, let me show you how we got here. Because this memo didn't appear from nowhere. It's the culmination of a regulatory strategy that's been building for years. October 2021, the Treasury Department proposes a new IRS reporting requirement. Banks would be required to report aggregate inflows and outflows for any account with more than $600 in annual transactions. Not $600 per transaction, $600 per year. Virtually every bank account in America. The proposal created immediate backlash. Banking industry groups warned it would overwhelm IRS systems with data. Privacy advocates called it mass financial surveillance. Republican lawmakers attacked it as government overreach. Even some Democratic legislators expressed concerns. The administration retreated. But here's what most people missed. The infrastructure was still built. The systems that would have reported $600 accounts to the IRS were developed anyway. The data collection mechanisms were implemented anyway. The surveillance architecture was constructed anyway. They just didn't turn it all on. Yet. The $600 threshold in this bank memo isn't a coincidence. It's the same threshold from that 2021 proposal, the number that indicates what they actually wanted before public pressure forced a tactical retreat. Now they're implementing it through a different mechanism. Not IRS, reporting requirements that require legislative approval, bank compliance protocols that require only regulatory guidance, same $600 threshold, same surveillance outcome. Different legal pathway. March 2022. FinCEN proposes updates to the Bank Secrecy Act regulations. The proposal expands the definition of reportable transactions and gives banks broader authority to implement risk-based monitoring of customer activity. The language is crucial. Risk-based means the bank gets to decide what's risky. It could be large transactions. It could be frequent transactions. It could be transactions with certain businesses. It could be transactions that match algorithmic patterns the bank doesn't have to disclose. The regulation passed with minimal public attention. It was technical, boring, buried in Federal Register notices that nobody reads. But it gave banks the legal framework to implement exactly what this memo describes. Enhanced monitoring, supervisor approval requirements, automatic SAR filing, all justified as risk-based compliance. June 2023. The Federal Reserve issues guidance on cash management best practices for regulated financial institutions. The guidance doesn't mandate specific withdrawal limits. Instead, it recommends that banks implement friction mechanisms to encourage digital transactions. Friction mechanisms. That's the term. Make cash withdrawals inconvenient, add paperwork, add delays, add questions. Make digital alternatives faster and easier by comparison. The guidance specifically mentions the environmental and operational benefits of reduced cash handling. They're framing it as efficiency and sustainability. But the effect is surveillance and control. September 2023. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen gives a speech about modernizing the American financial system. In the speech, she mentions enhanced transaction visibility as a tool for combating tax evasion, money laundering, and terrorist financing. Enhanced transaction visibility means seeing every transaction, knowing who sent money, who received it, how much, when, and why. The end of financial privacy. She doesn't mention withdrawal limits. She doesn't mention $600 thresholds. But the policy trajectory is clear. Every transaction must be visible. Cash, which is inherently not visible, must be minimized. December 2023. The Bank for International Settlements, sometimes called the Central Bank of Central Banks, publishes a paper titled The Future of Cash in a Digital Economy. The paper argues that central banks should actively manage the transition away from physical currency. Actively manage, not let market forces decide, actively push. The paper recommends gradual restriction of cash availability, combined with robust digital payment alternatives. It suggests that privacy concerns can be addressed through appropriate regulatory frameworks rather than through maintaining cash access. This is the international blueprint. American regulators don't operate in isolation. They coordinate with international bodies. They implement global policy frameworks domestically. February 2024. FinCEN issues Guidance Memorandum 2024 G003. This is the document referenced in the bank memo. The guidance establishes enhanced transaction monitoring protocols and recommends that banks implement tiered verification procedures for cash transactions. The guidance doesn't mandate specific dollar thresholds. It gives banks flexibility to implement thresholds appropriate for their risk profile, but it makes clear that $600 is an acceptable threshold, that supervisor approval is an acceptable requirement, that 48-hour delays are an acceptable procedure. When a regulator tells banks they have flexibility to implement certain measures, every bank implements those measures. Because failing to implement means regulatory risk. Implementing means regulatory protection. This is how policy gets made without legislation. Guidance, recommendations, flexibility, suggested best practices, all enforced through the implicit threat of regulatory scrutiny for banks that don't comply. The memo I showed you isn't one bank going rogue. It's one bank implementing guidance that every bank received. The only question is whether other banks implement faster or slower. The regulatory foundation is complete. The legal justification exists. The implementation timeline is now. Let me explain why $600 is such an important number, because it's not arbitrary, it's strategic. The Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 established the $10,000 reporting threshold. Any cash transaction at or above $10,000 triggers mandatory reporting to FinCEN. Banks must file currency transaction reports identifying the customer, the amount, and the nature of the transaction. For over 50 years, $10,000 has been the line. The number Americans understand as the boundary between ordinary transactions and reportable transactions. But $10,000 in 1970 is not $10,000 today. Adjusted for inflation, $10,000 in 1970 is equivalent to approximately $75,000 today. The threshold never moved with inflation. What was once a threshold capturing major transactions now captures ordinary ones. Someone buying a used car with cash triggers reporting. Someone paying a contractor for home repairs triggers reporting. Someone taking out money for a family emergency triggers reporting. The government gets more surveillance every year simply by letting inflation erode the threshold. But that erosion wasn't fast enough for some policymakers. They wanted more data, faster. The $600 threshold represents what they actually want. A number so low that virtually every significant cash transaction is captured. A number that puts every American's financial activity under surveillance. They tried to get $600 directly in 2021 with the IRS reporting proposal. Public backlash stopped the explicit version. So they went indirect, bank compliance protocols, risk-based monitoring, voluntary implementation. That's voluntary only in the sense that banks volunteer to stay in the government's good graces. Here's what $600 means in practical terms. The average American household monthly expenditure is approximately $6,000. If you spend even 10% of that in cash, you hit $600 in a single month. One rent payment to a landlord who prefers cash. One car repair, one medical bill, one home maintenance project. $600 isn't designed to catch criminals, it's designed to catch everyone. And once everyone is caught in the monitoring system, selective enforcement becomes possible. Maybe you never have a problem. Maybe you trigger an algorithm 10 years from now and suddenly your ancient withdrawal patterns become relevant. The data never goes away. The surveillance is permanent. The enforcement is discretionary. There's another reason $600 matters. It's the number that maximizes compliance burden while minimizing resistance. If they set the threshold at $100, the backlash would be immediate and severe. Too obviously totalitarian, too disruptive to daily life. If they set the threshold at $5,000, most people would never notice. Too high to affect ordinary transactions, not enough surveillance value. $600 is the sweet spot. Low enough to capture meaningful transaction data. High enough that most people won't encounter it regularly. The frog in boiling water threshold. By the time people realize what's happening, the infrastructure is built, the precedent is set, and lowering to $300 or $100 becomes merely an administrative adjustment rather than a policy debate. The memo explicitly mentions this. Phase 2 lowers to $300. Phase 3 implements digital-first protocols for all transactions. The $600 threshold isn't the end state. It's the opening position. Consider how this compounds with other financial surveillance. Your bank already reports interest income to the IRS. They already report large deposits through currency transaction reports. They already file suspicious activity reports based on algorithmic flags you never see. Credit card companies track every purchase. Debit card transactions are logged. Zelle transfers are recorded. Venmo payments are monitored. ACH transfers are documented. Cash was the gap, the one remaining place where transactions weren't automatically logged and reported. The $600 threshold closes that gap. After these protocols are fully implemented, there will be no financial transaction in America that isn't recorded, reported, and available for government review. Every dollar you earn, spend, save, or transfer will exist in a database somewhere. That's not hyperbole. That's the explicit policy goal stated in Treasury Department documents, BIS papers, and FinCEN guidance. Enhanced transaction visibility, comprehensive financial monitoring, risk-based surveillance architecture. They're building it in the open. They're just not putting it in terms ordinary people understand. Until now. The source who sent me this memo isn't the only bank employee concerned about what's happening. Over the past 2 weeks, I've received messages from 7 different people working at 5 different banks, all describing similar implementation timelines, all expressing discomfort with what they're being asked to do. I'm going to share some of these communications with identifying details removed. From a teller at a regional bank in the Midwest, they're training us to ask customers why they need cash. We're supposed to fill out internal forms documenting their responses. If someone says they don't want an answer, we're supposed to note that too. It feels like we're becoming investigators instead of service providers. From a branch manager at a national bank. We had a meeting last week about the new protocols. The compliance officer said it's about knowing our customers better, but the forms they're implementing go way beyond KYC. We're documenting patterns, habits, stated purposes. It feels invasive. From a compliance analyst at a major financial institution, the algorithmic flags are getting more sensitive. Things that didn't trigger reviews a year ago now trigger reviews. We're filing more SARs than ever. Most of them are probably nothing, but we file anyway because not filing is a bigger institutional risk. From a back office employee at a money center bank, they're building out the data infrastructure way beyond what current regulations require. My guess is they're preparing for regulations they know are coming. The systems being built can handle much more surveillance than what's currently required. From a recently retired bank executive, I left because I saw where this was heading. Banks used to serve customers. Now we're essentially deputized surveillance agents. The regulatory capture is complete. We do what Treasury wants because the alternative is being regulated out of existence. These are people inside the system telling us what they're seeing, not speculation, direct observation. The pattern across all these communications is consistent: enhanced documentation, more questions, more forms, more algorithmic flagging, more suspicious activity reports, and critically, more pressure to discourage cash transactions entirely. One teller wrote, "We have informal quotas for promoting digital alternatives. If too many customers in my queue take cash withdrawals, I'll hear about it from my supervisor." They don't say deny cash, but they make clear that digital transactions are preferred. Another wrote, "The training emphasizes customer convenience as the reason for promoting digital, but we all know it's about reducing cash handling costs and satisfying regulators. The customers aren't asking for this, we're pushing it on them." This is the ground level implementation of top-down policy. The regulators issue guidance. The bank executives create compliance protocols. The branch managers implement training. The tellers ask uncomfortable questions and fill out forms. And the customers, who just want to access their own money, navigate an increasingly hostile system. The employees I've communicated with aren't malicious. They're not trying to surveil customers. They're following instructions from above, instructions that come with implicit career consequences if not followed. One person wrote, "I know this is wrong, but I have a family, I need this job. What am I supposed to do? Become an activist and lose my career? So I follow the procedures and hope someone with a bigger platform will expose what's happening." This video is that exposure. These are real people inside real banks describing real changes that are coming to your banking relationship next month. And the consistency across different institutions tells us this isn't one bank's policy. It's coordinated implementation across the industry, exactly as the memo described. Regulatory coordination to prevent regulatory arbitrage. They're all doing it together because they were all told to do it together. What I'm describing isn't unprecedented. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history, across different countries and different circumstances. The technical details change. The trajectory remains consistent. April 1933, the United States. President Franklin Roosevelt issues Executive Order 6102. All American citizens are ordered to surrender their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve. The official justification was economic emergency. The Great Depression was deepening. The government needed gold reserves to stabilize the financial system. But the effect was the elimination of a private, untrackable store of value. Gold, like cash, could be held outside the banking system. It could be transacted privately. It represented financial independence from government control. After the gold was confiscated, the government raised the official price from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Everyone who had obediently surrendered their gold at $20.67 watched its value increase by 70% in government hands. The lesson wasn't lost on those paying attention. When governments move against private money, they benefit and citizens lose. November 2016, India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi announces, with just 4 hours' notice, that 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes are no longer legal tender. These denominations represented 86% of all currency in circulation. Citizens had 50 days to deposit their old notes in banks. During that window, they had to explain where the money came from. They had to submit to documentation and scrutiny. The stated goal was fighting corruption and tax evasion. The effect was forcing the entire cash economy through a surveillance checkpoint. People with legitimate cash savings faced enormous problems. Day laborers couldn't buy food. Small businesses couldn't pay suppliers. The informal economy, which employs hundreds of millions of Indians, ground to a halt. Meanwhile, the data harvest was extraordinary. Suddenly, the government had visibility into savings patterns that had been invisible for generations. Did it eliminate corruption? Studies suggest minimal impact. Did it create a surveillance infrastructure? Absolutely. March 2013, Cyprus. The European Central Bank, European Commission, and International Monetary Fund issue an ultimatum. Cyprus's banking system is failing. Bailout funds are available, but depositors must contribute. On Saturday, March 16th, all banks freeze. ATMs stop working. Depositors can't access their money. When banks finally reopen, not lost to bad investments, not lost to theft. Taken by government decree to solve a problem they didn't create. And the freeze came first. Before the confiscation was announced, the ability to withdraw was eliminated. You couldn't protect yourself because the exits were locked before you knew you needed to escape. October 2019, Lebanon. The Lebanese banking system begins restricting dollar withdrawals. First $1,000 per week, then $500, then $300, then informal limits enforced at bank discretion. The official exchange rate says the Lebanese pound is stable. The street exchange rate shows it collapsing. People with dollar savings in Lebanese banks can't access them except in worthless local currency at unfavorable rates. 4 years later, those restrictions remain in place. The temporary emergency measures became permanent reality. Billions in depositor wealth evaporated. June 2022, China. 4 rural banks in Henan province freeze deposits. Customers who try to withdraw discover their accounts are locked. Protests erupt. Authorities respond by turning the COVID health code system against protesters, marking them as infection risks to prevent them from traveling. A surveillance system built for public health, deployed for financial control. The pattern across all these examples. First, the capability is built, reporting requirements, monitoring systems, withdrawal procedures. Then, the capability is used, freezes, limits, restrictions, confiscation, and always, the justification is some form of emergency. Economic crisis, corruption, tax evasion, public health. The emergency changes, the playbook remains. The United States isn't Cyprus or Lebanon or India yet, but the infrastructure being built follows the same design. Surveillance systems, reporting mechanisms, friction on cash transactions, digital-first migration. The $600 threshold isn't confiscation, it's capability building. It's the infrastructure that makes future action possible. And if history is any guide, the infrastructure eventually gets used for its intended purpose. The question is whether you're positioned before that happens, or whether you discover your vulnerability when the freeze is already in effect. Everything we've discussed connects to a larger project that most Americans don't yet fully understand: the central bank digital currency, the digital dollar. The Federal Reserve has been researching CBDC implementation for years. In January 2022, they released a discussion paper titled Money and Payments: The U.S. Dollar in the Age of Digital Transformation. The paper outlined potential CBDC designs and solicited public comment. The public comments were overwhelmingly negative. Privacy concerns dominated the feedback. Americans, it turns out, don't want the government tracking every transaction. But the research continued. The Fed partnered with MIT on Project Hamilton to develop CBDC technology. They've engaged in international CBDC coordination through the Bank for International Settlements. They've sent personnel to study China's digital yuan implementation. The digital dollar isn't a question of if, it's a question of when and how. And here's what a CBDC enables that current systems don't. Programmable money. Not just tracked money, programmed money. Money that comes with rules built into its code. Imagine a dollar that expires if not spent within 90 days. A dollar that can only be spent at approved merchants. A dollar that cannot purchase certain goods or services. A dollar that automatically withholds taxes at the moment of transaction. These capabilities exist in current CBDC designs. China's digital yuan already implements spending restrictions and expiration for some government payments. Once money is programmable, it's controllable in ways physical cash never permitted. But here's the implementation challenge. As long as physical cash remains widely used, people have an alternative. They can opt out of the digital system. They can transact privately. They can escape the programmed rules. For CBDCs to achieve their full potential, cash must be marginalized, not banned outright. That would be too obvious, too politically damaging, but restricted, made inconvenient, reduced to a rounding error in the economy. The $600 withdrawal limits serve this marginalization strategy perfectly. If getting cash requires paperwork, supervisor approval, 48-hour waits, and potential SAR filings, people will stop using cash. Not because it's illegal, because it's hard. And once cash usage drops below a certain level, eliminating it entirely becomes politically viable. Nobody uses cash anymore, they'll say. We're just modernizing the financial system. The progression is clear. Create surveillance infrastructure for cash transactions. Implement friction that discourages cash usage. Promote digital alternatives aggressively. Watch cash usage decline. Eliminate cash as a vestigial remnant of the old system. Implement CBDC as the only remaining option. Activate programmable money capabilities. We're in phases 1 to 3 right now. The memo I showed you is phases 1 and 2 being implemented. The digital-first migration strategy is phase 3. Some might say this is conspiracy thinking. but it's not a conspiracy when they publish papers about it. The BIS has published extensively on CBDC implementation strategies. The Federal Reserve discussion paper is public. Treasury officials have given speeches laying out the vision. They're telling us what they're building. Most people just aren't listening. In the $600 threshold, it's not about catching criminals. It's about building the infrastructure for the next phase of monetary control. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller gave a speech in 2023 about digital currency. He said, a CBDC would need to be complemented by policies that ensure its adoption. Translation, they know people won't voluntarily adopt a surveillance currency. They need policies that force adoption. Making cash inconvenient is that policy. The memo I showed you is that policy being implemented at the ground level, branch by branch, withdrawal by withdrawal. By the time the digital dollar is ready for launch, the alternative will have been eliminated, not prohibited, just rendered impractical. And once the digital dollar is the only option, the programmable features can be activated. Spending controls, expiration dates, automatic taxation, social credit style restrictions. Science fiction? The technology exists today. China is using it today. The only question is whether Americans will accept it. And judging by how quietly the $600 protocols are being implemented, the answer appears to be yes, they will accept it. Because they won't even know it's happening until it's done. Given everything we've covered, what are the practical steps for protecting your financial privacy and access? What can you do in the next 30 days before these protocols fully implement? I want to be clear. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't know your specific situation. What follows is educational information about options that exist, not personalized recommendations. Understand the timeline. The memo indicates Phase 1 implementation next month. That's the $600 threshold with enhanced documentation. Phase 2, lowering to $300, is scheduled for Q3, likely July through September. Phase 3, digital first protocols, is by year end. This gives you a window, not a long window, but a window. Document your current banking relationship. Before the new protocols take effect, note how your bank currently handles cash transactions. What forms do they require? What questions do they ask? What are current withdrawal limits? This documentation helps you recognize changes when they happen. It also provides evidence if you ever need to demonstrate that policies shifted. Consider your cash needs. If you regularly use cash for legitimate purposes, the next 30 days may be your last opportunity to access larger amounts without enhanced scrutiny. I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm suggesting that building a reasonable cash reserve for emergencies, home repairs, vehicle maintenance, and other legitimate needs may be easier now than after the protocols implement. What's a reasonable cash reserve? Financial advisors often recommend having 1 to 3 months of expenses in accessible form. Make your own determination based on your circumstances. Explore banking alternatives. Credit unions often implement federal regulations more slowly than major banks. Smaller community banks may have less aggressive surveillance postures. Online banks have different operational constraints. I'm not saying any of these will be immune to the changes. The regulatory coordination described in the memo specifically targets consistency across institutions, but implementation speed varies. Research alternatives before you need them. Having accounts at multiple institutions provides optionality. Understand Form 8300. If you're a business owner or independent contractor who handles cash, understand the Form 8300 requirements. Understanding what information is collected and how it's used helps you navigate the system intelligently. Consider value storage alternatives. Cash is one form of value storage, but it's not the only form. Precious metals, specifically gold and silver, can be purchased from reputable dealers and held privately. They have no counterparty risk. They don't exist in a banking database. I'm not saying convert everything to precious metals. I'm saying understand your options. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, held in self-custody, represent another alternative. As we covered in a previous video, self-custody crypto exists outside the banking surveillance system. Real property, physical goods with intrinsic value, skills, and relationships. All of these represent forms of wealth that don't depend on banking system access. Diversification isn't just about investment returns. It's about reducing single points of failure. If the banking system becomes hostile to your financial freedom, having alternatives matters. Engage politically. The regulatory changes driving these policies are not inevitable. They're choices made by specific officials, implementing specific agendas. Contact your congressional representatives. Explain your concerns about financial privacy. Ask them to investigate the expansion of transaction surveillance. Most legislators don't understand the technical details of FinCEN guidance and bank compliance protocols. They need constituents to explain why it matters. The 2021 $600 IRS reporting proposal was stopped by public pressure. Similar pressure can stop or slow regulatory overreach through other mechanisms. Stay informed. Subscribe to this channel. Follow other sources covering financial privacy. Read the original documents when they're available. The reason these changes happen quietly is because most people don't know to pay attention. Awareness is the first defense. When you see changes at your bank, document them and share them. When you receive communications about new procedures, read them carefully. When you encounter friction accessing your own money, question it. Individual actions add up. If thousands of people start asking their banks why cash withdrawals require enhanced documentation, it creates pressure. If thousands of people file complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, it creates records. If thousands of people contact their legislators, it creates political consequences. The system relies on passivity. Active engagement disrupts the system. Let me step back and put all of this in context. What we're witnessing isn't a banking policy change. It's a transformation of the relationship between citizens and the financial system. A transformation with profound implications for privacy, freedom, and the nature of money itself. For centuries, cash has served a unique function. It's the only form of money that can be transacted privately, without intermediary involvement, without record keeping, without permission. Cash enables privacy. It enables freedom. It enables people to make transactions that are nobody else's business. This is not about enabling crime. The vast majority of cash transactions are perfectly legal. A gift to a grandchild, a payment to a neighbor for help with yard work, a purchase from a farmer's market vendor, a tip to a service worker. These transactions don't need oversight. They don't need documentation. They don't need to exist in a government database. But the system being built treats every transaction as potentially suspicious, every withdrawal as requiring justification, every financial choice is subject to monitoring and approval. This is not freedom. This is permission-based finance. A system where you can only access your money if the authorities approve. The memo I showed you uses the language of compliance and security, anti-money laundering, customer protection, risk management. But these words obscure the reality. The reality is a surveillance architecture that treats every citizen as a potential criminal, that requires documentation and justification for ordinary financial activity, that builds databases of every transaction, every withdrawal, every purpose. Some will say, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But privacy is not about hiding wrongdoing. Privacy is about maintaining boundaries, about having a sphere of life that isn't subject to external scrutiny, about being able to make choices without constantly justifying them to authorities. The founders of this country understood this. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches. The Fifth Amendment protects against compelled self-incrimination. These protections exist because the founders experienced what it meant to live under constant surveillance by the British Crown. Financial surveillance is surveillance. Knowing what you spend, where you spend it, and why you spend it provides a complete picture of your life. Your beliefs, your habits, your associations, your vices, your secrets, all deducible from financial data. The system being built will have that data on every American. And once it exists, it will be used by law enforcement, by tax authorities, by political actors, by whoever gains access, legally or otherwise. The $600 threshold is a data harvest. The enhanced documentation is a data harvest. The digital first migration is a data harvest. They're not building this system to ignore the data. They're building it to use the data. And once it's built, dismantling it becomes nearly impossible. This is why the next 30 days matter. Not because disaster happens in 30 days, but because the infrastructure goes live in 30 days. And once the infrastructure is operational, rolling it back becomes exponentially harder. We're at an inflection point, a moment where the trajectory of financial freedom in America could shift fundamentally. What happens next depends on awareness, engagement, and action. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if the trend can be reversed. But I know that silent acquiescence guarantees the outcome they want. So don't be silent. Let me bring this back to where we started. A memo. 12 pages, internal distribution only. Marked confidential. Describing $600 withdrawal limits, enhanced documentation, supervisor approval requirements, 48-hour delays, automatic SAR filings. Coming to your bank next month. This isn't speculation. This is documentation. The memo exists. The regulatory foundation exists. The implementation timeline exists. Your bank will probably send you a letter explaining the changes in vague, reassuring language, updated security protocols, enhanced customer protection, modernized procedures. Now you know what those words actually mean. They mean surveillance. They mean friction. They mean a system designed to push you away from cash and into fully monitored digital transactions. The question is, what you do with this information? You could do nothing. Wait and see. Hope it doesn't affect you. Hope the protocols are lighter than described. Hope someone else fights this battle. Or you could prepare. Build cash reserves while access is still straightforward. Establish banking alternatives. Understand your options for value storage outside the banking system. Engage politically. Share this information with others who need to understand. The choice is individual, but the consequences are collective. If enough people prepare, adapt, and resist, the system becomes harder to implement. If everyone waits passively, the system achieves its objectives unopposed. I've shown you the documents, I've explained the regulatory framework, I've walked through the historical parallels. The information is now in your hands. What happens next is up to you. Drop a comment below, tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you're observing at your bank. Tell me what you're going to do in the next 30 days. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the notification bell. The next 30 days will see rapid developments as these protocols roll out, and I'll be covering them in real time. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Someone who uses cash regularly. Someone who values financial privacy. Someone who should understand what's coming before the letter from their bank arrives. This is finance market news. Thank you for watching. The memo is real. The timeline is real. The changes are coming. Prepare accordingly. Next video drops in 48 hours. We're doing a follow-up on bank-by-bank implementation timelines and which institutions are moving fastest on these protocols. If you bank with Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citi, or any major regional bank, you'll want to see which specific changes are hitting your accounts and when. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. And remember, the time to prepare is before the policy takes effect, not after.